Our next topic is getting and keeping long-term volunteers. This is some of my best and worst memories, our volunteers. I can remember when Kate Johnston was actually our volunteer coordinator with the Bastrop County Long-Term Recovery Team back from 2011 to 2014. 2014. We had a church group coming in with some younger kids. And so they were going to do some cleanup at one of the properties. And it was Mr. Frankie's property. And they got to the property, and Mr. Frankie was dressed in a sundress with his stuffed boobs, riding on a tractor. And so Kate got the call and had to arrange another location for these folks to go to. Now, we already knew that Mr. Frankie liked to create the shock factor for people. And so we had warned him not to do this, that if he wanted the help and he needed to get things cleaned up, that he needed to behave himself. So he eventually got the help, but it wasn't from this church group who just couldn't handle it. Then there's also the call you get that we're bringing 100 volunteers for 2 days to your place, and they're all under 14. What do you do? So these two are going to talk about those kinds of things, and the fact that it's okay to say no. Who I have here speaking is Nina Andaloro, and Nina was the volunteer coordinator for the Jamestown floods. Now, Jamestown was in a canyon in Colorado, and they were literally evacuated by helicopter because the canyon flooded and the roads totally washed out. They were out of their town for 14 months. Their entire town was evacuated for 14 months. She, as volunteer coordinator, was literally the long-term recovery. They didn't really have a formal structure for a long-term recovery. She was the paid person, so she was kind of it, and the mayor and her worked together on long-term recovery. So she's going to talk about her experiences in bringing in volunteers, particularly after that length of time had passed from your disaster to when you were even able to recover. Then I have Jeff Koller here from Mennonite Disaster Services, who is the regional operations coordinator for this region. And he's going to talk about it's going to kind of be a point counterpoint, because he's going to talk about what volunteers are looking for from communities in order to come in and be long-term volunteers. So I want you to ask as many questions of him as you want, and don't be gentle on him at all.
You can take it.
All righty, let's get them started.
Okay. Yeah, my experience in volunteer management, Chris mentioned 100 volunteers showing up. In 1993, an F5 tornado came through Heston, Kansas, and took out about half the town, leveled it. And I live in Mount Ridge, Kansas, 6 miles away. I was at the command post the next morning to help see what needed to happen. I was in charge of taking care of the volunteers. It's right in the middle of Mennonite country. We have a Mennonite church college in Heston, Kansas. It was not hit, thank goodness. We have a Mennonite church college in North Newton, Kansas, Bethel College. I was presented about 8 o'clock the next morning with 350 volunteers, able-bodied college students, ready to go to work and clean up. And it was my job to find work for 350 people immediately. So I've kind of been there. And now I'm in my role with Mennonite Disaster Service. I'm out there setting up projects and finding locations for volunteers to be.
So one thing I want to clear, Chris made it seem like my town was empty for those 14 months, but actually we were there as a small team, 3 of us, working together. So we had to rely on our volunteers because our residents were not there. They could not participate in their recovery until we got water back into the town and they could come home. So we fully relied on volunteers. So hopefully today we can give you some information about getting volunteers and keeping volunteers. So that's our goal for today. So who are these people? I was very skeptical about people showing up in our little mountain town wanting to help. What do they want? Why are they here? What's their motive? And a lot of our community was as well. And it's really just people that feel it in their heart that they want to come and help. They want to make a difference and get fulfillment through it. And sometimes they've been through a disaster too, or they've been through a life-changing event that they want to reach out and help other people. Or they are friends with people in your area. They feel that it's God's work or it's their mission of their church. And overall, it makes them feel good. Everybody in this room has volunteered at one time or another. It feels good, right? Do we have any volunteer coordinators with us today? Yeah! You have the best job in the world. And the most challenging as well.
There's one.
Yeah.
Amy in the back of the room.
Yeah. So the most important things about these volunteers that you need to keep in your mind is that they're doing this work because they want to connect somehow. So that is what you have to concentrate on is how do I get these people to connect with the work? Whether that will give you some ideas of how to do that, but really that is their main reason for being there is they want to connect somehow. And so that is your committee's job is to figure out how do we connect with these volunteers. Would you
Absolutely.
say to that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so the types of volunteers, probably all familiar with these. Spontaneous volunteers, the people that show up, right? They mean well. We're going to show up because we care and we want to do something for this community. I heard it on the news. We want to get there, we want to do something. And they just come in carloads, they come by themselves. It's really hard to organize them. They can be the most difficult volunteers to deal with. They sometimes take up a lot of time because you're trying to figure out what to do with them. Jeff, we had talked about this one, about having preconceived notions of what your community needs. We're going to come in and we're going to bring you cases of water. We're going to do some tree cutting without any proper licensing, without asking the homeowner. Really kind of difficult to deal with this type of volunteer.
And sometimes, depending on what their insurance company, how their insurance companies work, you can come in and start cleaning, removing signs of damage before an insurance company's had a chance to look. Coming in without the system, spontaneously, and doing whatever they feel is best can do more damage, end up hurting your homeowners. You guys are past this spontaneous stage right now, but monitoring and watching that is really critical to defend your community.
So some of the things you can do with spontaneous volunteers, and Jeff did mention, you probably are beyond this. Maybe some people are still showing up with this type of volunteer, but you can tell them no. You can say no. If you would get with a group, we would appreciate that. But you are allowed to say no to them. They do become helpful in certain ways. One thing that we did, we had some help from the United Way, and they sent somebody out to help me figure out how to deal with spontaneous volunteers. What we did was we put together work days. And so I worked through the United Way. They had like an online system. People could sign up for, the second Saturday of the month. They'd sign up, they'd be in the system. I'd have a printout of all these people that were going to be showing up. And then I would go out into the community and find the work for them. And I'd line up the work. And then when they showed up, then we had tasks for them and we broke them out into groups. And that was very helpful to have a system in place to handle the spontaneous volunteers. Next is the summer groups. For a while, they were the bane of my existence that first summer because I was still in the stage of, wow, we need to accept all the help we can get. I can't say no to anybody. I just have to figure it out. This is my job. This is what I have to do is figure out how to put these people to work. And then I had a group, the Southern Baptists, not the Southern Baptists, the other Baptist group, Marla Bearden.
Yeah.
Texas Baptist group.
Texas Baptist.
Fantastic
Yeah.
group. But they are in the business of youth groups. And imagine, I live in a town with 250 people. They wanted to send 200 kids to my community to help us do work that I had to kind of create. And so I finally, I think it was Liz DiPaolo was my angel from FEMA who said, you don't have to. You don't have to keep doing this. You can tell them what you need. And that was an enlightening moment for me. And so I said to Marla, okay, I will take your group twice during the summer. And I will only take 50 of them. So if you can figure that out, we'd love to have you. And so starting to set limits on those large groups that want to bring everybody into your community is okay to do.
Because you can make work, but if the volunteer, and this is coming from the volunteer side, if the volunteer senses that it's not meaningful work, you lose them. And they will never come back when you actually have meaningful work that needs to be done. You'll ruin them. And so, in the case of Jamestown, they had to rebuild the entire creek through town, and there are about 750 million rocks to be moved and stacked. If they'd have brought 200 kids in and say, stack these rocks, and the kids are thinking, I want to help get someone home, you lost them. It has to be, and we'll come back to meaningful work later, but you can't just make work to accommodate large groups. Way better to meter it out and say when.
Anybody having these experiences yet? Where you feel like, how are we going to do this? It puts more stress on you.
Well, this was just a comment. Early on, we were talking about spontaneous volunteers and trying to stop them. In the first month, I was volunteer donations in Fort Aransas, and we knew the second Saturday after Harvey we were going to get inundated, and we asked for directed volunteers only. It's because Corpus Christi wasn't hard hit, and people loved Fort Aransas and Rockport, and they really wanted to help. There's 20-mile stretch between Corpus Christi and Fort Aransas. The line was backed up all the way that morning, and so it was a scary feeling. When you're, what do? You can't hold up a sign and say, no, please don't come. And part of them were onlookers, but there were a huge number to help. And they also love the community, so our projects, we knew it was coming, so we had projects on the beach cleanup, projects, and we had a list of projects, but trying to coordinate all of them with the handful of people we had was awful. But one of the best that we did was a group of 160 football players from Texas A&M Commerce, and they had called ahead. And they said, we will house these kids, these 300-pound kids, for overnight, which cost them a lot of money, if you have something they can do. So we were thinking, these are really strong guys, you know. And the little cemetery there was totally covered up with seagrass. And so we knew it was going to be a tough job for them. But we found, we got donations of rakes and shovels from the area, from a Woodman's Church in Houston flew a plane down with shovels and rakes, you know. And we coordinated that. They showed up, they got out there with rakes and shovels, and then people saw them with bobcats that were doing other work and showed up with bobcats pushing around all that stuff. They got the entire place cleaned up in about 6 hours. So that was great. It was pretty funny watching the boys jump when the little snakes would come out and squeal and run, and they weigh 300 pounds. But anyway, that was a very rewarding day because that was a little more organized than just the, you know, do what you can kind of thing. But it's tough. For doing volunteers, tough job.
I had a baseball team from Koller that steadily came up once a month. That was sort of their community service, and they had good leadership. So that's another thing I would recommend with these work days, spontaneous groups. If you want to start doing that kind of thing, get volunteer leaders to be your key point out in the field. Sit down with them in a meeting prior to the work day. This is what we've got lined up. Go to the site. This is what it looks like. This is what we're going to do. And then have them be the arms. Back there, the gentleman that's the volunteer coordinator, this is great work for you to do, to really start getting leaders in your community who are the volunteer leaders. That was a key
Absolutely. I'm Joe Foley, AKA Pops. I'm the volunteer coordinator for the Galveston County Long-Term Recovery Group. I've got a new saying: if you're not very good about managing expectations, you better be good about damage control. And I think managing expectations for these incoming groups is really important, so they understand exactly. You know, one of the things that I think we're running into here is that everybody remembers the pictures of the boats going up and down Main Street in Dickinson, Texas, and seeing the water all over the county and that whole entire area. And they're not going to see that when they come here. They're going to see things that look fairly normal, but they're not. And so we need to make sure they understand that when they come in, and again, find meaningful things for them to do. Because we want them to have a good experience when they come here, and we want them to come back as visitors and experience some of our hospitality. So, but managing expectations is really important, not just for volunteers, but for victims as well. So that's something we're very keen on.
Yeah, that's a key point.
I think another thing is that it does look normal in a lot of places now, and so when people come down and they see that the debris's been picked up or things that were damaged are now demolished, they're just beautiful green areas now. And so it's hard to continue to tell the story and to let people know that the need continues because it's clean on the outside, and you can't tell that inside that house it's completely gutted or somebody's still living with a hole in their roof or whatever. So the storytelling is critical. And of course, Harvey lost the opportunity to tell a compelling story. We had about 2 weeks before Maria and Irma took everything, right? So, you know, we fell off the radar pretty fast. And I think it's important to continue as we go into the 3rd, 5th, 7th, 10th year. How do we tell that story in a way that still conveys that we need you to come, but don't bring the Boy Scouts in, like we can't handle 150 10-year-olds, but you know, like how do we tell that story and get specific kinds of labor that we need?
So I just wanted to say, pretty early on, literally I was hired 2 days after the storm just because of the storm. So one of the things that I found an immediate need for was organization. So to keep the volunteers organized, whenever they came in, I knew I'd be having 50 or 60 a day. So I created a form for a team lead person to take with them. Form your group before you get here or right when you get here. Whoever you are, come see me, the team lead. This is your assignment. This is where you're going. And this is the backstory behind the person that you're going to help. And then here's all your t-shirts, here's everything that you need, here's all the tools. And you are responsible when you get to the home, if it's something you cannot go into, if mold has already taken over, if something's wrong, you need to reach back out to me. And on that form was my cell phone, my desk phone, my everything. And if you need to take pictures, send them to me. You're going to be my eyes and ears while you're in the field, because I never got to leave my desk.
Right, right.
And then actually out of that, because you want to make for a meaningful experience, so because I'm United Way, donations are important too, but I actually ended up with 2 leader giving things after that, where I made about $10,000 because 2 volunteers had a great experience.
Excellent. And that piece that you said about knowing who that resident was is such a huge thing for the volunteers.
I just wanted to share a quick best practice, and I also wanted to preface by saying some of these best practices for us, where we're located at in Houston, between 2015 to Harvey, we had 6 major flooding events in our area. So a lot of these best practices come just from experience, like you guys have said. But what we did was we had trained some board members who could be volunteer leadership, and then we also created folders with what you talked about, with statistical information, pictures, and best practices, expectation setting, so that way volunteers feel like no matter what job they're doing, they're able to get a full understanding of what's been going on and how the community's been impacted even after.
I always gave a quick presentation to the volunteer groups when they came up. This is what happened to us. Please be respectful of our residents. Don't take photos unless you ask the resident to take a photo with them. Be respectful of the people's property because you have both sides, right? You're playing both sides of the field. You have to take care of your residents. You want to get the work done, but you also want it to be a good balance between the 2 groups.
I think to Tracy's point too, and Pop's back there, the couple of comments, it's very important when you as a volunteer coordinator or volunteer manager present that story and tell the story of why you're helping this homeowner or why you're helping this neighborhood or community. If you're in a very, very economically depressed community prior to the storm, deferred maintenance on homes. They looked like a disaster before the disaster, and now they're here. Volunteers have radar, and they see, hey, this isn't a storm, or this is. You need to be able to communicate clearly the story, and that perhaps their home was in poor repair before, but the storm then finished it. So be forgiving of these folks. They especially need your help. But being able to communicate that clearly is part of the meaningful work part.
Just to say, we're using it disproportionately impacts people already living on the margins.
Get on the mic.
That's our term, is that we're saying it disproportionately impacts people who are already living on the margins. So it's an opportunity to educate people about the margins of our society and poverty. And one of the people from Episcopal Relief and Development refers to those homes as non-resilient housing.
Oh, that's a good one.
It's a good term.
Sorry, I should have mentioned this before. Besides being a volunteer coordinator for the LTRG, I'm also a district coordinator for Team Rubicon. Some of you have probably seen the gray shirts with the red hats out in your neighborhood, and they are all about leadership. We actually added about 200,000 people because of Harvey. When I joined in 2012, we had 5,300 members across the country. Now we have 75,000. We're in Canada, we're in Australia. We actually had teams of Israelis that come in and work with us, but they're all about leadership. They're all about volunteer coordination. So if you don't know who the contact is for Team Rubicon in your area, ask me and I'll get you in touch with the right person.
I'm a fan. We had Team Rubicon in our community. Carlene, I know you did too, right? So some really good things about these summer unskilled groups is that you can clean up your town. That's what I really used those groups for. You're not skilled to go into a house and repair a house, but after a flood, our landscape looked like the moon. And so I saw it as my duty to see if we could make that look better because I knew that that would improve everybody's spirits. Because every day you drive up the road and it's just like, this is where we live. It's horrible. So I mentioned already about leadership. Team Rubicon is awesome about this. They met with me weeks in advance of them coming on site even, and they were organized about the work, making sure we had all the proper paperwork in order. So it is really essential for these types of volunteers to speak with their leadership and get things lined up, set the expectations with them. Hey, you're coming to our town, we're really small, we can't handle a lot of people, you need to bring your own supplies. Really line those things out prior to. And these are the people that are going to go back into your community, their communities, and they're going to say, oh my gosh, I went to this town and it was awesome. We had such a great time. You guys should do it too. So some of the solutions we talked about is talk to the leadership, matching the skills to the work. One of my worst days on the job was I was gung-ho about getting these people to do work, and I had lined up all the work, but I actually didn't know who the people were going to be that were coming. And I had a group of really fit Boulderites. We're close to Boulder, everybody's in shape and run 1,000 miles a day. And they show up and they're gung-ho too to do the work, and I put them on a job that was pretty labor intensive. Lots of rock moving in somebody's yard. And I visited like halfway through the day and realized that was not the job for them. So that was a big lesson learned for me. And so one of the things that I started doing was, I think I might have a slide on this. Here we go.
There, yeah.
Self-selecting tasks. This was huge for us. I'd go out, I'd inventory all the jobs that we had to do. I'd put a sheet down for each of the jobs, so when the volunteers came in from the groups, they could look at the sheets and say, oh, planting trees, love it, I'm a tree planter. Office work, yes, that's more my style. So they could self-select their tasks as to what made them feel good and they felt comfortable with it. I became a volunteer because I couldn't dig out homes. Like, I knew that my body wouldn't be able to handle that. And so for like a month, I was like, what am I going to do for my community? I can organize like nobody's business. And so I started helping emergency management organize things in the office. And that's how I got started doing the volunteer coordination piece.
And that first point up there too, it is important to work as a team. The volunteer, you don't have to, as volunteer coordinator or manager, you don't have to find all the work. Talk to your case work folks and the leads. They've got needs out there too that you may not be aware of. Behind the doors, in the house, work that needs to be done, things like that. So work together as a team to help identify that work. You don't have to do it all yourself.
And I think that's where my situation was unique, was that because we were kind of the case managers, we know our people, we knew what was going on in our town. But
right.
To your point, definitely the case managers know the family and they know the needs of what they need in their life right then.
I've experienced a couple of communities where they were operating kind of on islands and a little bit of sparring going on, encourage that cooperation as they work together.
Okay, so we talked about these things. And once again, we're going to just keep emphasizing that feeling of feeling connected to the work is what's going to bring people back, and they're going to spread the word. This was one thing I dealt with early on and ongoing. We didn't have any water in our town, so I had to have people bring water. And I'm Italian, and I wanted to feed everybody. But that wasn't going to happen. I was in no position to do so, and I didn't feel like I could ask anybody else to do it. And so I talked to Liz again, my FEMA buddy, and she said, you don't need to feed everybody. You tell them to bring their lunches, bring their sandwiches. So bring your own food. If you have residents that, I would say it's more so for the long-term volunteers that they feel a connection with them and they want to bring them food, that's perfect. That's lovely, and it means so much to the volunteers. But you can't expect your people to participate. They're under enough stress as it is. You don't want to put anything else on them. I also saw, besides being the volunteer coordinator, I was also the donations manager. And so I saw a lot of donations from Boulder restaurants, Denver restaurants. Hey, we've got 150 people coming up Saturday. Can you make some sandwiches for us? And so that was a good source. Donations from groups, and it's okay to ask the groups to bring their own stuff. One thing we had to deal with, because we didn't have water, we didn't have toilets. And so we had to bring in porta potties, and they were a staple in the town for definitely a year. Probably one of the worst parts of my job, because we had to use them in the winter when there was, 6 inches of snow on the ground.
Jamestown lost 50% of their infrastructure. Their water supply system and their sewer systems and septic tanks were gone. So that was reality.
Yeah, but if you are seeing a lot of volunteers, it might be a good idea to go ahead and get porta potties. It makes sense. Then you're not putting the stress on your own systems. Okay, and our favorite group, skilled group, they are the gems of the volunteer world. They are awesome, especially the ones that stay around. And I know that this is a very unique situation you have here because such a widespread area has been affected. It's hard to keep volunteers coming in.
We're meeting with the same pool of volunteer organizations.
Yeah.
Begging, will you come back to the Coastal Bend area, please? And we're all looking for those organizations that have to be.
Yeah, that's a difficult situation that you're in. We'll see if we can help with that.
Yeah.
So these folks, of course, have handy skills to repair and rebuild homes. Jeff, do you want to talk about what a volunteer group like yours needs?
Yeah, I can just give, I'll just quickly give the MDS thought. We refer to 4 pillars to come to town. There has to be meaningful work. There has to be accommodations for our volunteers. There has to be funding for the property. And why am I losing number 4? But the long-term housing. Oh, I'm sorry. No. The other one is, from our perspective, volunteer availability. Will our volunteers come to your town? Has your story impacted them in Pennsylvania or Indiana to make them want to come to Texas for 3 weeks or 4 weeks? It's very compelling. It has to be a compelling case to draw people out to get them to come, which is a burden on the Long-Term Recovery Committee. So the housing is one. It's not just a place to sleep. It's not just cots and bunk beds. People are working all day. They need showers. They need adequate kitchen space to cook for a group of 20 to 30 to 50 folks. Adequate kitchen space, and I've learned that the cooks are the key thing. I just brought a new project director with me, driving from Kansas down here Saturday night, and yesterday I got him oriented yesterday morning in Victoria, and I made the point to him, you're not the boss, your crew leader's not the boss, the cooks. Pay attention to the cooks. Make sure the cooks are happy. The cooks ain't happy, nobody happy, just like mama ain't happy, nobody's happy. You've got to have not just sleeping facilities, but showers and the best kitchen facilities you can come up with to feed groups, to make them able to come long term. And one of the challenges then is if a substantial chunk of your buildings are impacted or damaged or out of service, it takes away that stock. You have residents trying to live somewhere, and now you need to find accommodations for a larger group to come in. In my role, I'm always, when I come into town, when I'm invited to Bastrop to come investigate, can the Mennonites come and help? As I drive into town, I'm looking, that church looks like it's not very active. Or is that nursing home shut down? Or has that motel been out of business for a while? Or I'm looking at buildings that are around, so I'm going to ask you, what's available in your community. You on your side of the table need to be able to quickly assess and think what structures are available that we can house a large group. Or is there a church whose mission is to help be part of the recovery? Will they give up their basement? And we're talking a year, 2 years, 3 years for the long-term groups that are going to come and stay. it's a really, that's one of the biggest things that you have to do to draw the volunteers in, is have a place for them to be.
You need to recruit these guys. To Beth's point, everybody's after the same groups. We had heard about the Mennonites, and my mayor, Tara Schettinger, was adamant about getting the Mennonites. She was like, we want that group. That is the group we want to be building our homes for our folks. They're a good match for our small community. So we pursued them. I tell you, I was dating Jeff. I was definitely courting him for a while. He didn't even realize it.
Yeah, she's smooth.
And I cried to him.
One thing I should come back to on the housing, one thing that, don't stress over it. I mean, worry about it and try to do a good job of finding housing. Don't stress too much. Most of us, Samaritan's Purse, the Baptists, the Lutherans, the Mennonites, have some shower trailers in our inventory. If you've got a church building or a schoolhouse that has everything but showers, okay, we'll bring the shower trailer. We'll talk about it. We've got a kitchen trailer. If you've got everything, you've got the showers but no kitchen, most of us, Samaritan's Purse, most all of us have kitchen trailers. So we will supplement the buildings you have. I should have touched that.
I'm going to mention something here, just in case you don't realize this, but most of the groups that come to town don't bring funding for materials. They might
Right.
have their own equipment, but they're not going to fund your projects. They bring the labor.
Yeah, one of our four pillars is there meaningful work, volunteers available, housing, and is funding available to provide the materials to keep our volunteers busy while they're there.
This next point this took up a lot of my time. Transition between leadership. And Jeff got many phone calls from me because if you have volunteers in your town for 2 years, they have to have people coming and going too. You know, somebody's going to come and stay for a month, but that leadership is going to go away. And sometimes if there's no continuity between the two people, it's like starting over again. And I had to start over at least 19 times. And it wasn't always easy. The personality of the new person was completely different from the person that just left. I had established a wonderful relationship with someone. We shared a lot of stories and meals, and then they went away, and then I had to start fresh. And so that was a lot on me. Now, MDS does have coordinators that can help with that transition, but I'm sure some of the other long-term groups are the same. And so just expect that transition piece and prepare for it as best you can. If you get wind from your person you're dealing with, hey, I'm leaving in 2 weeks, okay, let's start meeting every day. Let's start looking at this. I want to, show me your documentation of what you're passing on to your next person. And that will just keep things running a little bit smoother. And it is a lot to get these guys to come and stay. But it's definitely worth it if you can do it.
Especially a widespread storm like you folks are dealing with Harvey. There's a limited number of the long-term groups, and you're all competing. It's tough.
Mm-hmm. So I think some of these, we talked about, create a physical list of those potential places for them to stay, both short-term and long-term, so you know, oh, well, we have a group that can come for 2 weeks. Oh, well, let's put them up here. We had to get creative in our community because we're a mountain town, there's no hotels, there's one bar and restaurant, there's a post office. That's it. The next town was, at the time, because the road was bad, it was like 45 minutes away. And so we found there's 2 outdoor education centers above our town that have students usually. And they couldn't get students because the roads were out. And so we used those facilities for housing for a lot of our volunteers. School district came forward and said, you can use the school for the summer. And so we housed MDS volunteers there for the summer.
And then we stayed in private homes there.
Uh-huh.
We swapped out. Jamestown has a few folks there that is their primary residence, but the folks who were displaced had family elsewhere to go be with. And so they were generous and allowed us to keep their homes. We fixed up their home in swap for us being able to stay there for 6 months to a year. And they were generous enough to not come home in that time frame and let us stay there. So that worked out, yeah.
Okay, so tricky situations. People not in it for the right reasons. I think one of the hardest situations for me was proselytizing groups that would preach to our residents. To me, we don't want that right now. And sometimes they didn't hear us. That was one of, tricky thing for me to navigate. Interactions with our people sometimes didn't go so well. Whether that was the emotional state that our resident was in or the volunteer, who's to know, but that was hard to navigate as well. Ulterior motives. You had mentioned this one, the media circus.
Yeah, there are, well, we encountered it here in Harvey on the early response, the cleanup response. We came and set up in 3 different communities, and while there, we were somewhat elbowed out of the way by big players who came in with 200, 300 volunteers for 3 days with lots of television cameras and did their filming and then gone the next town. And it helps their promotional videos when they go fundraising to say, look what we did, but they're gone. What was the motivation? Yeah, motivation is fundraising. It's not service.
This was one I experienced a lot when people say they don't want help from you. You have all these volunteers coming to help them, and they're like, no, we're fine. We're okay. That happened for months for me, and I had a hard time. So finally, what I started doing was kind of a little bit of blackmail. I was like, well, I've got all these volunteers coming. I need something for them to do. And then they were like, oh, okay, you can send them, they can come on Saturday, whatever. And then once they started getting that help, it was a change in them. I don't know if it's being proud and not wanting to accept help, but once they did and they started interacting with the volunteers, it was like a load was lifted off of them. And then they were the first in line to say, oh yeah, you got volunteers coming? Sure, I'll take some. They realized that they could actually get help from people.
Yeah, be sensitive to that need. Some of it's just pride. I was raised, we don't take welfare. We don't do that. We don't take handouts. I'll make my own way. Well, you can't make your own way. You've lost everything. We see that from the outside. You see that as a long-term recovery leader. You know that they do need help. But you got to respect that. And another thing that we're seeing a lot more here than in perhaps other communities is undocumented folks that need help, that they're afraid to raise their hand too high, but they need help, and we're there to help them equally. But be sensitive to folks who are afraid to raise their hand. You have to approach them in a different way to see if you can bring them to the table in a different way. So.
What types of situations are you guys dealing with that are tricky?
Sheila.
Hi, Sheila from Bastrop County again. I was writing this down and now I realize why I was losing my mind in 2016. In 2016, we did rebuilds with the help of MDS from 2015 fires. We also had MDS youth came and helped us with fencing during the summer. We also had a youth group come from the Dallas area that said, and they came with their limitations. They said, we have teenagers and all they want to do is help with landscaping, which was wonderful. So we were able to put them on jobs to help with the landscaping from the houses that MDS had rebuilt. We also had another youth group that came through that said, just put us to work. They wanted to bring 150 youth. The individual that was organizing was from the area, and that's one of the examples where we had to say no, because we were working with a couple of other groups already, and we just didn't have a way to house that many youth, and they wanted to stay for a week. And we didn't have a place to house them because we were already housing groups that we were working with. And then we had spontaneous individuals that just wanted to help. And we have a volunteer form on our website. And it asks on the form, it says, how many people do you have in your group? And it starts with the number 5. And so 5, and they can pick up. And I had a guy, and he actually called the office because he was not going to fill out the form because he was one person. And he couldn't understand why our form did not cater to the one person. And I explained to him what we were doing, where we were in our process, and that if he wanted to volunteer, that we would put him with another group. And after a whole bunch of going back and forth, we did end up putting him with another group, and it did end up being a good experience for him. But I just want to say it is okay to say no. And I did feel bad because for that one group, because they had to find somewhere else to put those 150 kids, but it just wasn't going to work for us that summer.
So a suggestion I would have is, I didn't always say no outright. I would say, well, I know that Lyons, the town down the road, is looking for some help. And so if you all can network in your groups and say, hey, Beth, I've got 150 volunteers that need a place to go. Do you need them? And just sort of pass them along the chain. So sometimes that is a good match.
And in Harvey, that worked out great for us, but at the time when we had a fire and it was just us, there was no way there was nobody else to refer to.
No neighboring disasters.
No neighboring disasters. So
Yeah.
I think they hooked up with another group in another part of the state is what they ended up doing.
So in Fort Bend, following some of the flooding that we had in 2016, we found out a lot of groups, and sometimes they were established organizations that were coming in to do mucking and gutting, as well as spontaneous volunteers. Them aside, we found out that there were different standards when mucking and gutting a house. We had some groups that would come in and rip out way too much. We had some groups that would not rip out enough. We had some groups that were very sloppy in their ripping out, and so another group would have to go in behind them and do all that. And that's very confusing and upsetting to the resident to find out, like, I've already had my home mucked and gut. No. In order to put sheetrock back in, we can't have a jagged edge. We've got to have a straight line, so on and so forth. So following Harvey, what really worked well for us, not everyone participated in it, but it was great. We had one nonprofit in our county that really kind of owned training volunteers. They said, look, if you want to muck and gut every single morning at 7:30 to beat the heat, we're going to be at this spot. It will be like a 10 to 15 minute or even like 20 minutes. We're going to tell you some good standards on how to muck and gut a house. And that's pretty much all they did. And then these groups would just go off because they would use crisis cleanup to identify which homes that they were going to do. And that was huge. And then as we moved on, that group kind of morphed into, now we're going to teach people how to do demolitions, and how to do that safely. And so one group really owned how to just train some of these volunteer groups that were coming in too. So even some established groups coming in from outside, like, well, no, here, especially because we have floodwaters coming in, we need to make sure we're ripping out at least this much, and that we're really drying the place out before we do anything else. So that worked well. Again, not everyone came to the training, but it helped. I think they even tried to video it and post it online after that. So that kind of also helped.
Just to add to that, the group actually, even more innovative, decided to, with United Way support, have some volunteers get certified for the mold certification. Because that's also a huge barrier, is that volunteer groups come in, they muck and gut the home, but there's no mold treatment that's done. So I thought that was very innovative of the group and of United Way to say, let's train, let's pay for one or two of our volunteers to get certified. So then we're really giving the homeowner that quality, that high quality of remediation.
Right, because there aren't many groups that will do mold remediation.
Yeah, that's one thing too that we should talk about is considering safety. Mold remediation is a big safety issue. But along with that, even the muck and gut, be clear about who's responsible and liable for for injury and caution, just good safety practices.
We got the 5-minute warning, Jeff, so I just want to.
Oh, yeah, we better keep going then.
Autumn Brown with Southeast Texas Event Task Force. I'd like to just touch a little bit about what you said about people not wanting to raise their hand too high. So we have a great group of volunteers who are bilingual. And so for us in Port Arthur, the Hispanic and Puerto Rican population is very significant in breaking those barriers. They don't always trust, or they're sometimes scared. And so having individuals that will work with your group that are bilingual and help break down those barriers has been amazing for us and allowed us to reach out and help a whole lot of different people.
So some of the tricky navigation pieces, you have to accommodate groups of all sizes. Sometimes you get small groups that take a lot of effort to bring in, and they get a ton of work done. So it's like this whole balancing act with being a volunteer manager, bringing in volunteers. The deferred maintenance thing was a big deal in our town. A lot of our people are in tiny mining homes, little cabins. And, you know, it's their home. But when the flood came through, it really damaged it. And I know that you all are dealing with those issues too. Jeff mentioned already about helping families who may visibly be doing better than others, but you never know the whole situation until, you know, the case management is complete and you know what the need is. So what does it mean for your community's recovery? Benefits. Make sure that you're keeping track of all the volunteer hours. FEMA told us this in the beginning. They didn't really say how we were supposed to be keeping track. So we do have a spreadsheet on our website, will be on our website, that you'll be able to use. If you haven't been doing so already, start recording those volunteer hours. They come back to your community. You can put it back out to the media. We have had this many volunteers and they have done this much work. It's a powerful statement. You're going to be able to get work done that you would have thought, oh my gosh, how are we going to do this? The town looks awful. And lo and behold, a few years later, it gets done. It's amazing. So the interactions go both ways. The volunteer feels moved that they have done something good for somebody, which leads to more volunteers coming because they're spreading the word. And then you have your residents who feel, hey, people care about me. People are still thinking about us here, you know, a year after the flood. And then they can turn around and do for themselves. It's a huge cycle. Some people have problems saying what they need. But once you get volunteers into the community visibly doing stuff, and Chris, I know that we've talked about this too, of what was the moment when you felt like your recovery really kicked in?
Once we started the first house.
Yes. Yeah. So once that visible sign, it, you know, it could be just one house, but the whole community sees that. And they're like, oh, it is happening. It really is happening.
This goes to the language barrier on undocumented folks too. Once they see that we're helping one of their family, one of their neighbors, they become a little bolder about coming out.
So the section here on getting volunteers, this is a big one for you guys. So knowing the need, for sure. Combining it with those personal stories that you talked about already. One thing that you should all have is a one-page document. This is our community. This is what happened to us. This is the need. And you can change that need as it changes, but then you always have that paper in front of you when you're talking to a volunteer group. Hey, you know, this is what happened to us. You don't even have to think about it. It can just be automatic. Shared spreadsheet to keep track of all your volunteer groups that you've contacted, that you're going to contact. You never know when that might come up again. You may have tried somebody once, but maybe they weren't available. Go back to your list. Try them again. Something that we talked about earlier with the media, and I know that you've had experience with this one.
This one I recall very clearly, my friends from Joplin back here. How many of you in Texas paid attention to the Joplin tornado? How big a news was it in Texas, and for how long? A week? 2 2 weeks, how long did it last? Coincidentally, at the exact same time, there was Kate Middleton and William somebody got married. Did you hear about that? For a long time in the press? Yeah. There's competition for the coverage. There just flat is competition for the coverage. And I got stung on that on the drive down here. I drove in from Kansas Saturday, stopped in Kansas to fill my gas tank. An attendant there saw my MDS logo on the side of the van and said, uh-oh, if you're going out, that means something happened. Where are you going? And I said, well, I'm going to some meetings in Texas. It's regarding the Harvey recovery. And the response was, oh, isn't that done already? That happened a long time ago. I have a sister that lives down there, and their house is rebuilt, and their neighborhood looks like it always did. Isn't Harvey done?
Yeah.
That's the truth, folks. That's reality, because that's where the volunteers are coming from. And if the perception, the Joplin tornado dropped out of the press cycle very quickly, even though it was a massive, deadly, horrible tornado, it dropped out of the mainstream coverage too quick. Harvey is, I can't believe, I was stunned at that conversation Saturday morning that Harvey's falling out of attention. I went online and looked at the top 10 news stories of 2017. Hurricane Harvey's like number 5 or 6 in the overall story. The election, of course, is number 1, but then there are other things to follow. News cycle's critical. I just say that.
So some of those things that you can do to keep the attention in the media, social media, huge. If you are comfortable with it, do it yourself. If not, get a volunteer to do it. You have to just keep putting stuff out there to the public. And most of the stuff you can put out are stories of people doing better, things, needs, volunteers, call for volunteers. Hey, we need volunteers next Saturday. So social media. And thank them on the social media. We have a vetted list of volunteer groups that we can share with you, that you can use it to start your spreadsheet from. And it's from our team thinking about their history of disaster and which groups help them. Call the groups. Invite them to come and visit. It's huge to get people to come and see your town. There's definitely a point in recovery. I knew it. I saw the switch go off in people's heads. The organizations I was working with, the government people, everybody was yes, 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 yes for several months. And then something switched. And they were like, well, I'm not sure about that. I don't know if we can get it done that fast. It's going to be a few weeks before we can do that. And so you need to keep on them, like to keep it fresh in their mind that your community is still hurting and they need help. Can we say no? We've talked about this. Keeping volunteers. We've mentioned lots of ways that make the connections with the community. Invite them in, share your experiences, encourage your residents to make connections with these volunteers. I gave a disaster tour every week for a year and a half with the Mennonites. Every Tuesday, I showed up, took people around the town, and lo and behold, these folks went back to their community and said, oh, we had such a good time in Jamestown. You should go there. And that kept bringing volunteers back. Encourage people to be home when the work is being done. It's just important. It's important for both of them. It's important for your resident to feel that love.
Meaningful work, meaningful work, meaningful work.
Before I left, I had a volunteer from MDS contact me. He said, my family and I are coming to Jamestown for vacation. Are you going to be around? I have people calling like probably every other month saying, we're coming through town. We want to stop and see how you guys are doing. Thank your volunteers. Handwritten notes are awesome. Small gifts that you can think of from your community that is meaningful to you. In my community, we have artists and musicians. That's who lives in my town. And for our Mennonite thank you, we had a performance. And people wrote songs for them and did performance for them. And Jeff got to be part of that. And we also made him this collage. Didn't take much, We just asked somebody to take some photos for us and put it together, but it's so special for that person who's been part of your community.
Yeah, this was a gift from Jamestown to my wife and I. And I talked to my wife on the phone last night, and she said I was sitting eating lunch Sunday noon, and I turned around and she said, my friends were missing on the wall. Very meaningful. It's a small thing, but it's hugely meaningful to the volunteer.
Yeah. And there's my dog.
There's Stella.
She was definitely part of the recovery. So this is just your call to action here. We've said all these things already. And there's that.
Thank you both so much.
Thank you.